Well, here we are again. I hope you've been enjoying the lessons on the 60s a little bit more. There's been some fun things there to watch, but also some challenging things. I think as a way of kind of summing up what I see is going on here is the 60s as a phenomena, cultural phenomena, is raising a lot of questions about uh, the big questions that we've talked about all year. Lots of questions related around the human condition, and that connects directly with the civil rights movement and the student activism. And as you move now tomorrow to the gender identity issues, these are asking questions about the human identity. I see a progression kind of unfolding something like this. So this whole thing that we call the 60s, begins with the civil rights movement and its emphasis on equality. And it's going to seek change in the law to be able to bring about that equality. But that change in the law isn't necessarily going to change people's hearts. We've talked about that before. And then as the emphasis shifts towards student activism, students getting more active in the civil rights movement, but then also focusing on the Vietnam War and class considerations and what's going on at the universities, where there's a really distinction between the academic leadership as a seen as kind of a controlling influence on the lives of the students, and they're challenging that. So as we shift to student activism in the 60s, you're getting more of an emphasis on justice and trying to figure out now, how can we change people's hearts and minds? How can we change our society? Not just change the law. It's not enough to just change the law. We want to be able to change society. And now tomorrow, as you move into the gender and sexuality sorts of issues, this is a real focus on identity and liberation from the ways in which women first have been defined by a male-dominated society. This is trying to get to bring about a change in perspective. We want to be able to not just change the law so there's more equity for women and for any minorities. We also are still emphasizing changing society so that it's more accepting. But in order for that to really happen, you've got to change people's perceptions about what it means to be a male, a female, a human being in general. So what I think is being left out of this question to a large degree is the question of the human destiny. What gives true meaning and purpose to life? What is the source of maybe making things truly just and truly right? That's largely being left out of the equation, I think. So now, as you shift to tomorrow's lesson on gender, you're going to see a couple. You're going to see somebody who we've met before, Simone de Beauvoir. Remember her emphasis on the second sex. A woman is not born a woman. A woman becomes a woman based on society's expectations of her. I'm going to skip over the Kinsey report for now. You're going to be reading this article about the infamous Kinsey reports. I'm going to come back to that on Monday. So go ahead and see how it integrates into the notes tomorrow, but I'm going to come back to that on Monday. So if you're watching this today, I'm going to post this afternoon. If you're a eager beaver and you're watching this afternoon, you can stop here. You probably should stop here and then come back tomorrow after you've done the gender lessons. So you should recall Betty Friedan and the Feminine Mystique from back in U.S. history. I hope so. She raises some important questions, definitely, about equality. But she has, as you'll see tomorrow, as you'll see in the article that brings up the four troubling points of the feminine mystique, that she has some flaws in her presuppositions about the identity and experience of what it means to be a woman. I really appreciated, and I hope you did too, the observations by Mary Cassian on the feminine mystique and on feminism in general. I hope you find that helpful, but this is going to be one of those things where I know this is going to touch some of you differently. So feel free to comment on this video with questions, concerns, things that you want to know. Why do I think the way that I do? Why did I choose the things that I did? And I'll respond to all of your comments. Um, Mary points out that the issue here isn't feminism itself, but the real issue for us as Christians is this desire to take personal authority away from God and place it in our own hands. And she points out, Betty Friedan is asking the right questions. Um, what is it that we're looking for that will bring joy and fulfillment and purpose and meaning to our lives? But where she goes for answers, I don't think, and she doesn't think, actually solve all of our problems, the deep questions. Certainly, the feminine mystique and the feminist movement in general brought about more equity for women, but uh, it also kind of emphasized that grabbing the power for ourselves, taking control of our own lives, not just over workplace situations, but also over sexuality. Women, because of the advent of the birth control pill and because of the legalization of abortion, this kind of snowballs out into questions of who's really in control. And I'm going to address that more on Monday's lesson when we talk a little bit more deeply about sexuality and homosexuality. So we'll come back to that. What's ultimately going to satisfy us, no matter whether we're a male or a female, isn't going to be worldly things or necessarily changes in the law or in society or in the way that we perceive each other. We've got to ultimately find our ultimate fulfillment in who we are in Christ. So now I've got a guest to join me here today to talk a little bit more about the gender issue from a female perspective, since you've probably noticed I'm not a female. So welcome my wife, Brenda.
Hello.
She has been home working. We brought a bunch of stuff home from her office, so she's working behind me back there. And we sit here all day and we work together, which isn't too bad. Every once in a while we get up and hug and go out for a walk or whatever. So Brenda, as you know, I've told you a lot about who she is. She's worked in marketing and for years. She's been at Farm Credit out here in Mahomet for 12 years.
12.
What's your exact title at Farm Credit? Explain what you do.
Right now it's called Digital Engagement Manager. I started as a marketing coordinator 12 years ago, and as things evolved and changed and digital and social media and email marketing became more prevalent, I sort of became more specialized in that role.
So you've been kind of focusing on a career track in your life ever since college. I remember you were going to be a broadcast journalist, right?
Right.
So would you, as a professional woman, as a woman in general, would you consider yourself to be a feminist?
Well, I mean, I I wouldn't, but if I were younger, like when I was in college and first coming out, I may have said yes without fully understanding what that meant.
Right.
I guess my understanding of it was, yeah, I want to receive equal opportunity in the workplace and to be paid the same as someone who's doing my same job, who's a male. Um, I think there's probably a whole lot more associated with what being a feminist is that I probably don't align myself with.
So have you personally experienced inequity in pay and position and promotion in the workplace?
Well, that can be very subjective. There's a perception, but they keep things really tight. You don't like go around printing unless you work for the University of Illinois, and they publicly make it available to what people earn. I have suspected, and then there was a time probably 15 years ago when I was in a position as a marketing director for a company, was very successful in the role and really improved their numbers. And I moved on to another position, but I stayed in contact with some people there because we're friends. And one of them was the office manager, and we walked together. And I did find out from her, she shouldn't have told me, but she did because it made her mad that the person they hired after me was a male. We both had master's degrees, and they started him at a significant higher salary than I even ended at. And
Wow.
so she felt that was so grossly unfair.
Sure.
And so of course, I didn't work there anymore, but you know, it made me more mindful of doing research and knowing what people in my field should be paid.
Hmm.
So then when I would go into a job interview or I was at a place for a certain time period, I kept my eye on what the market would bear for that position. And so I sort of had a good sense of what my worth was, whether I was male or female.
Right. So I've shared with the kids over the years, lots of things about us and our circumstances and how, how we live and the reality that you've always, for almost all of our marriage, always made more money than me. I've probably had a lot more domestic responsibilities, especially during the years when I was a teacher and had summers off and the kids going to school with me and things like that. Um, has our lifestyle, our kind of situation ever felt challenging to you, like in terms of the roles that we play? Do you ever feel a sense of tension or uh, that we're somehow not doing things in a biblical way?
Um, I think we've come to peace with it.
Hmm.
I do think that there have been times I struggled with it because maybe it was my own insecurity of how I would be perceived. I wasn't the mom doing all the special activities with the kids, but you were,
Hmm.
and it did affect how I may believe that my kids may grow up thinking of me too,
Hmm.
based on what society would teach them. You know, so I think that there is probably times that you struggled with it as well
Oh yeah,
because of role identity of the man's supposed to be the one who
the
provides and
breadwinner.
yeah, things like that. So I feel like what we've really focused on more, especially really since our kids have grown and left, is we both work, we both provide for our family in different ways, and whatever is mine is yours, and whatever is yours is mine. We put it in one pot. We sort of mix it together, and you do a lot that takes the burden off me because you're home more,
Hmm.
so you take care of laundry more and things like that. And when I tell other women the things that you do, they go, he does. So there's a lot of full-time working women that I know that I work with, that they work full-time and their husbands work full-time, but they still carry a lot of the traditional roles.
Sure.
Now, that being said, I look at our neighbors across the street who are about 15, 20, 25 years older than us, and they both worked all the years of their kids growing up, but she does all the cooking and the cleaning, and he does all the yard work. So they've divided it up into roles that they both feel comfortable with, and I think that's okay too.
Hmm. Yeah, and
They're both working.
yeah, that's a reflection of their a generational difference too, just between us and them. Now, this is the one that gets a little bit touchy, and I'm going to throw you a curve here because I didn't prepare you for this one. Uh, like the sense that conservative Christians theologically would have about male headship, spiritual headship. How do you feel about that? Hey, do you see me as the spiritual leader of our family?
I do. I don't think it doesn't feel like you make all the decisions. I think we talk about
Right.
a lot of things,
Hmm.
but there are, and then we come to a decision jointly, but there are some times where I may disagree with you on
Right.
something, and you say, this is what I think, and I really want us to go this direction. And then I mean, for instance,
Uh
can I
oh.
give a for
Oh,
instance?
give a for instance.
So I'm sort of feisty. I can sort of want to fight for my rights. And I remember when our neighbor up behind us was building an addition on their house, and it really came really close to the property line. And there's rules for you can't build more than so many feet from your neighbor's property lines. And if you want to, you have to get their permission and notify them by mail and blah, blah, blah. And it was going to be extremely close. And they just started, they dug a foundation, and I was really upset and I wanted to put a stop to it.
Hmm.
And I wanted you to
Well,
agree with
you
me.
wanted me to put a stop to it.
Well, I wanted us to go to the
Sure.
county or something and
Yeah.
say, "Hey, this is not okay," and you just felt really strongly that we shouldn't do that, and I felt really strongly that we should. And that was one of the situations that I just prayed about it. And even though I still felt strongly, I just sort of did it your way.
Right. And I
So,
can, and the other side of that coin is that I always feel like Brenda has much more spiritual discernment than I have. I has more of awareness of how the Spirit is moving and leading us in as we do ministry together and just as we live together. So I do think that we have our own various leadership strengths and gifts, and this is how we do it. So we just thought we'd give you an example of how we do it. I can't read my last question. I got to get closer. Um, are are there, from a woman's perspective, do you feel like there's been any downsides to like women's liberation?
um, yeah, I do. And this is, this is my opinion. Um, you won't find things in the Bible that says this word for word for word, but I think what has come with women's liberation was sexual liberation.
Hmm.
And before that, it was like boys will be boys and girls, you got to be the good ones, and you got to sort of like draw the line and everything like that.
Well,
And
that
then,
was even your experience growing up in your own family, wasn't it?
yes, I had a different curfew than my brothers. And even a brother that was younger than me had a later curfew than I did because I was the girl. I still bring that up at family reunions. No one remembers it but me. Um, but I think that the way my dad thought about things was that girls can be taken advantage of. And so he felt like he laid down strict rules for me so I wouldn't be taken advantage of. And but I do feel that the women's liberation part of that was this being sexually liberated, the right to your own body, doing what you want with your own body. And I feel like in a way that's emotionally harmed and spiritually harmed women, where I feel like they've been deceived and feeling like they've been empowered, but in fact, it's really stealing something from them. Now, that's being said, I don't think the way the good old boy club and boys will be boys, girls, you've got to be the good ones. I think boys should be good too. I think that it should be equal in how we treat morality and ourselves. And so I feel like we lost out feeling like we were trying to get something, and
Sure.
in reality we didn't.
Yeah, and it also created a situation, especially with the advent of the birth control pill. It seems like that gives women power over their own reproductive circumstances, but what it also does is it takes away from any inhibitions that men have because, oh, I might get you pregnant, and that that creates a whole nother sexual dynamic, which is where we're going to go on Monday. Monday we're going to talk more deeply about how did we get to the point in our culture where sexuality is just defined by whatever we think we want to define it at. It's been a long journey. In fact, we've been talking about this really since the beginning of the year. So we'll come back to that on Monday. Thank you, Brenda, for joining us.
You're welcome.
And I'll talk to you guys again when you watch this tomorrow. Just remember, we're going to wait and deal with the homosexuality issue on Monday. I'm not skipping it. All right. I'll see you later.
Bye.
Stop.